So without further ado, I'll present our speaker. So Chantal is a passionate environmental professional who's dedicated to protecting Canada's freshwater ecosystems and promoting sustainable shoreline stewardship. With a background in environmental science and hands-on experience delivering shoreline naturalization projects, Chantal leads education and outreach initiatives through Watersheds Canada's Natural Edge program. This award-winning program supports waterfront property owners in planting native vegetation that stabilizes shorelines, enhances biodiversity, and improves water quality. So I'll hand it over to Chantal.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining me tonight. I'm going to stand over here if that's okay with IT. And now I'm talking about native plants and some species of risk along the water's edge and how plants and the ecosystem along the water edge also supports our terrestrial and aquatic animals. So a little bit about our organization first for anyone who doesn't know who we are. We work with landowners, communities, and organizations across the country to deliver effective and transferable long-term solutions for freshwater stewardship. We have a few different programs. I obviously work on the Natural Edge program. I am the regional coordinator, so I do all the on-the-ground work pretty much between Cornwall, and we're all the way up to Marmora now as well. But we have delivery partners across the country, some in like Belleville, all the way out to BC, as my manager Chloe is heading out there to do some training. So we develop tools and resources that can be shared readily to landowners, municipalities, or other organizations, even like the River Institute. We also have Your Love Your Lake program, which is in full swing right now. It's in partnership with Canada Wildlife Federation, where we do shoreline assessments, assessing certain characteristics like amount developed, canopy cover, climate change resiliency questions, and then provide customized reports to those landowners. We find this can be a really effective tool to communicating directly to a landowner about exactly the things happening on their property. And some people don't even know that what they are doing could be potentially harming the ecosystem they love so much. Then it also works with the lake associations, so they get a whole report about what kind of properties are on their lake, and that can help develop lake plans and other long-term stewardship activities that the lake associations does. We also have our freshwater ecosystem group. It's kind of very much like this speaker series, but all online. We work with scientists and other people like the River Institute to present topics. So we have an example of our one-pager afterwards that you get after the presentation. This one was about salting. We also have our fish habitat. So we do cold water stream restoration, walleye and trout spawning beds, and brush bundle projects. Currently being expanded right now, we have about like 15 different projects up in the Bancroft area this fall, ranging from mostly walleye and brush bundles. And then lastly, we have our planning for our shorelands, which works mostly with municipalities and any planning people, whether it be from municipal or federal, to provide resources and tools and information to better prep them for planning their specific area. So that was a little bit of everything. We have also so much more educational stuff on our website. It's a little overwhelming sometimes to find some stuff there, but we do group everything into toolkits. So if you have a specific, I'm worried about invasive species, you can go find a whole toolkit with our resources, Invasive Species Council, everyone's resources, and we kind of bundle them all together as we're all about sharing resources here at Watersheds Canada. So back to the Natural Edge program. That's kind of my passion and my expertise. So we work with municipalities, private landowners, farmers to create resilient shorelines. We've also recently started working in the wetland realm as well in partnership with Ducks Unlimited. So again, just a different type of riparian, but then you call it a wetland at that point. So we use native wildflowers, trees, and sedges, and pretty much anything I can get my hands on to be able to plant diverse ecosystems. So I'll go a little bit more why we do this, because I know it's my whole job, so there's a good reason for it. You might hear me mix up shoreline and shoreland throughout the presentation. That's just because we like to indicate that the shoreline is not just that one line there where water and terrestrial meets. It encompasses much more, including the upland, drier area where you get your more forest-type ecosystems. Typically where you like to see your development happening as well, you want that a little bit farther from the water to reduce impacts. Not always the case. Then you move to this riparian area or a floodplain area where you get changing water levels, so you get different plant species there because of those changing water levels and are very diverse locations. We then have that shoreline itself, which can shift throughout the year. And then we move into the littoral zone, which is that aquatic area where sunlight can reach the bottom. So again, a really important area. Sometimes that area is really, really big, and sometimes it's only a meter wide before the sunlight can't reach the ground. So just let you know, I might make those two words up, or sometimes I say riparian. So they all kind of mean the same thing. So why do we do this? What are our lakes facing? So this is a bit older data from 2019 now, so we gotta update that soon. But through our Lovely Lake surveys of 40,000 different properties across the country, it showed that only 22% of the properties have the ecosystem present to sustain life. So that number is about 75% natural shoreline. So that was concluded through decades of research that if you leave that 75%, there's enough ecosystem services, there's enough erosion control, all different factors that can sustain a healthy lake ecosystem. And we found only 22% of all 40,000 had those properties to it. And I'll tell you, if we do update the data, it's not better. Also, our lakes are really changing from climate change. So in multiple different ways with our increased storms, that's increasing runoff and erosion, higher water temperatures. This is I was gonna say great, but it's not really a great photo of a blue-green algae bloom. And we really like to show this as it's a completely natural shoreline. But if you were to look at the rest of the lake, I believe this is White Lake. It's very developed lake, and it's even impacting those nutrient runoffs and whatever's causing this algae bloom is from far away, but still impacting this natural area. So now the animals can't live in a blue algae bloom as they can be toxic to some animals. So it just shows what you do over there really affects down there as well, and an example of how climate change is impacting our waters. We'll skip that one. Here's some other good data points is that 90% of aquatic species and 70% of terrestrial wildlife need a healthy riparian area. So you might not think all the aquatic species are really getting impacted from what we do up on land, but 90% of them need it. So that would be for rearing their young fish in the really shallow areas, amphibians moving across the shoreline, turtles, a lot of different species that are needed both sides of that. And some great examples of the common organisms you see along a riparian area. And the biggest thing, and we're really going to have a great impact on reducing the climate change impacts, is improving our water quality. This is a great infographic. There's a whole research study done on this. But it basically shows that if you have a natural shoreline, you only have 10% runoff, so 10% of all that road salt, although it's agricultural fertilizers and pesticides, and everything that puts on our land, only 10% of it can get into our water if it's naturalized, whereas up to 55% gets into our water if it doesn't have a buffering area. That's due mostly because of evaporation and increased infiltration. So I'll get into how native plants really help with that infiltration to get that 50% infiltration rate. One of that ways is by stabilizing soils. They have nice deep roots that hold onto that soil. They're effective from boat wakes and general waves if you're on like a larger body of water, like I'm from Kingston. So I live just on Lake Ontario, and those waves can get pretty big some days. So they're really effective at controlling that. And these two pictures kind of show different types of erosion. So this is a photo, I forget what lake, but it had a new property owner come in. Whether or not they knew or not, they cut down almost everything. You can see a lot of tree stumps there, and under canopy vegetation as well, they cleared out. And you can't see as great in the photo, but when you get up closer, you really start seeing that erosion happening and like literally streams of soil coming down this cliffside without that vegetation. So they're probably going to be in trouble in a few years with erosion problems. This shows another type, a type that is not as great with our increase in boat wakes. This is called undercutting. This is when wakes come in and just chew away at that soil. Natural shorelines are not as super effective against boat wakes, as you know, they weren't there when these plants evolved. So, and we have also noticed increase in the size of boats nowadays, increasing the waves. So this shoreline, I believe, is pretty much mostly natural, and it's just been cutting it away. So I'll go into some solutions about that. One of those being a vegetated riprap, which is like a rock that you would lie down and then plant within. So we have lots of resources like that on our website if you'd like to learn more. Here's a great image of why native and why have that vegetation. See that mowed grass up there? It's got nothing. So our general rule is kind of what you see above is what you're gonna see below. So when you have a manicured mowed grass, you're not getting any roots below because the plant's putting all its energy to constantly keep regrowing, and that causes it to grow very dense and have dead foliage as well. So it kind of creates what I call like a slip and slide. So when you get a large storm come through, or even just a regular rainfall, that dense root system that's really shallow is just gonna let the water run right across it and then right into your waterway. That's picking up the geese poop that was right there into it where you're swimming. Whereas you have, especially things like trees, they have almost like highways down into the deep, deep soil because the rain drops up on the canopy and then goes down the trunk into the roots. Same way with the shrubs, it kind of guides it down into the soil instead of just running over top. So great image depicting how different root systems act as well. So we always say diversity is great, both in human life and on land as well because of these different root systems. Another benefit of having natural shorelines is regulating water temperature. This seems like a pretty simple idea. Plant a tree, have some shade. It's good for water temperatures, but it has a lot of like smaller benefits that have big impact. So even things like if you have a shady shoreline, it dictates the gender of some turtles that may be laying their eggs along your shoreline. It dictates what kind of fish could lay their eggs in that area. Certain cold water fish like colder water to lay their eggs in and live in. So if it's not warm enough, that impacts that. Even like frogs drying out without having full sun on them. So, and then if you have a retaining wall, like you see in the photo up there, that's even worse than having just like a mowed lawn, as that rock retaining wall is gonna slowly release that heat into the water over the nighttime. With the climate change impacts we're seeing, we're having warmer temperatures in our lakes. This is gonna just exacerbate that issue by keeping them warmer overnight. And that even has impact on ice coverage, that has impacts on amount of algae that could be in there during the wintertime, and it's kind of like a spiraling effect. So even just planting even a few trees and shading out that water can have major benefits. So how can we create a climate resilient waterfront, backyard, literally anything? Stuff I'm talking about is applicable to, but had to make it a little bit waterfront focused in this presentation. So this one, again, waterfront, leaving fallen aquatic vegetation and fallen logs. This helps break up wave action, which then reduces erosion. Like I said, natural shorelines aren't great at like boat wake action. So having vegetation really slows that down, creates shade again, which I said, very important, and that's right in the water. And if needed, have like a single pathway out for swimming or elsewhere. This is through our Planning from Our Shorelands program. This could be applicable to any kind of property. The main thing is trying to reduce any of your impacts through development. So this is a very easy way to be sustainably developing your property. So this talks about permeable driveways, updating septic systems if you're in a more rural area, even stuff like floating docks improves your what we call environmental net gain. Okay, so now my fun stuff I like to talk about, plants. I'm a total plant nerd, so amateur botanist as well, so I'll be going through that kind of stuff, and I really enjoy working with plants every day. One of the biggest things and something I'm learning more and more about recently is host plants with their insects and how essential they are for survival, having those hosts. Everyone kind of knows of the monarch butterfly and the milkweed. It's a very common, you need the milkweed for the monarch butterfly to be able to lay its eggs on. But it's I'm saying estimated very roughly in Ontario, as there's not a ton of data, that about 40% of insects in Ontario require specific host plants to complete their life cycle. And that's out of tens of thousands of insects, like we don't even know. So this is all like an investigative thing they're discovering right now. And a common misconception is that if you do have a host plant like the monarch butterfly and the milkweed, it's not the actual flower that insects needs, it's the vegetation. It needs to be able to lay its eggs on that. Monarch butterflies have co-evolved with milkweed to be able to actually eat the toxic vegetation that milkweed is. So if you were to eat milkweed, you'd get very, very sick, whereas they've developed a way to be able to actually digest it, which then makes their babies toxic to predators. So that's really cool way they work together and have co-evolved together. But like you see here, that monarch butterfly is just on a Joe Pye weed, which we plant very often, but a great nectar source for them. Many insects, including a lot of bees, are very specific what kind of flowers they like, not even just species. So they're very, it's hard to explain. They really like a type of flower instead of just a family of species too. So like some bees won't go for a Joe Pye weed because they don't like the shape of that flower, but they might not have a specific host plant as well. So still like heavily researched now. So that's kind of where I'm trying to learn a lot more about. Even stuff that new research has come out that shows, this was done on bees, that the pollen that they eat and feed their young with may have specific microorganisms in them, just how we need specific microorganisms for our gut bacteria. They also might have those potential microorganisms living in the pollen to have for their gut microbes too. So you'd think something that itty bitty wouldn't have like a huge microbiome going on, but new research suggests that it does, and only those native species can have that those microorganisms living in them. So just another small little thing that has a big impact. And lastly, I bolded it, loss of native host plants mean loss of insects. And we are also in a biodiversity crisis for both insects, birds, amphibians, pretty much across the board. So if we can support our insects, which is the base of our food chain, we can support a lot more organisms. Native plants are really resilient to climate change. They've been evolving here since the last glaciation period and before, so they can continue to do that. Their deep root systems allows us to survive drought, and we have specific ecotypes across the country. We have 3 of them in just Ontario alone, so that specific plants like those areas. So if you keep planting those and keep supporting them, they'll be more resilient to potential impacts like future droughts and extreme weather. And lastly, from a landscape perspective, they generally require less water, less fertilization if you pick the right type of plant. So you don't have to maintain them as much if you're doing a native plant garden. Another topic that I really like to talk about is how invasive species threaten our native species. So I know in this area, Phragmites is the big concern. So I'll probably use that as a big example. As we can see firsthand how they outcompete our native species. They block our roadways potentially in the Phragmites example. And they really outcompete anything there. So I just talked about all the benefits of native plants, but when we have invasives coming in, it kind of kicks them out, mostly because they don't have any predators or diseases or anything that's affecting them because those haven't moved here with the plant. My favorite example, which is very detrimental to North America, is the American chestnut tree. It had a canopy cover about 30% in all of eastern Ontario. It was about the Manitoba border out to the ocean and had covered about 30% of that canopy. It was a major food source for animals, for indigenous communities, as it had a really great high nutritious nut on it. But it can be sourced back to an invasive plant that they believe brought into the Bronx Zoo in 1904. They think they've tracked it down to that specific plant that introduced the chestnut blight and completely knocked out that entire tree species that covered up to 30% of our canopy. It was a major impact, and we're still seeing that today in our forests and how they've affected that. But it's just interesting how one specific plant they brought in has created such diversity, and that could be happening in our gardens right now as we don't know it. So I like to also compare the chestnut to our ash tree, an emerald ash borer that's happening right now. It could be another American chestnut devastation from another invasive species. So hopefully it can get under control, as we have a little bit easier to control an insect than a fungal disease such as the chestnut blight. This kind of shows how our actions can have much bigger impacts, because the Bronx Zoo just brought a tree over and now our forest is gone. Lastly, I'd like to touch on how our pollinators and native plants and host species interact with our food systems. As you know, we all like to eat. I just had a delicious dinner here at Snitzel's. So pollinators such as bees, butterflies, and beetles, a lot of people forget about beetles. They were actually the first pollinators, so they co-evolved with all our new flowering plants thousands of years ago. They're one of the most diverse insect species out there. There's about 1.5 billion types of beetles in the world and still being discovered. So lots of really specific host interactions in the beetle world. My favorite to talk about is in our area, the magnolia tree. It's a very ancient species, and it was pollinated by beetles. We no longer have those beetles pollinating in our area, and we don't get fruit off our magnolia trees anymore. So, and talking way back, and when magnolias are native, they were actually an agricultural crop. Their petals are edible and kind of taste like ginger, so they were designed to get bigger and bigger flowers using those beetles as pollinators, because they had to selectively breed them. So they were an agricultural crop pollinated by a very useful beetle. So bees, butterflies, and beetles combined are essential for over 75% of flowering species. The rest are all wind pollinated, so it just shows how important insects are to how many different plant species. And then 30% of the crops we eat are also insect pollinated. Native plants support those native pollinators by providing the nectar and the pollen. Bees like the pollen as they create their honey. Butterflies and beetles like the nectar, that's the sweet sugar they can eat out of it. And then they move pollen around. Another, again, interesting fact about why native. No May has been a new initiative in the last decade or so about leaving your lawn a bit longer, letting those first flowers come up. Those first flowers are called ephemeral flowers. They're the first flowers that come out of the year and are essential to those emerging insects and bees that are coming out really early in the year. A study, this was I think in BC, so it could be a little bit different based on our native ephemeral species, but dandelions have 50% less pollen than most of our native spring ephemerals. So it's great that we're leaving some flowers and opening up our minds to keeping things more natural, but even not using native, like our native trout lily, which I have all over my lawn now, trying at least, has 50% less food for that insect. So they have to work twice as hard just to get the food out of a non-native species. Native bees are specialized. I mentioned the microorganisms already because I'm very excited about that. I just learned it recently. And then obviously with our decline in pollinators, reduced crop yields, especially for our fruit, nuts, and vegetables. This is seen in California in our big almond growing fields. They actually have to ship in bees to be able to pollinate at that specific time because they mow all underneath the trees. There's no other habitat. It's just orchard, and they don't have the pollinators to actually create the fruit we want to eat. So it's just adding cost to our food, whereas if we incorporated that in like a resilient agricultural mindset of having like a wildflower strip or leaving underneath your agricultural crop more diverse, you can really benefit the pollinators, which benefits your food production in the end. So interesting farming direction some farmers are going, and that's how we work with our farmers as well as supporting the pollinators for supporting their crop. At Watersheds Canada, we have a native plant database, which ties into our app. I encourage you to go check it out, scroll through. It's based on our grow zones across the country. So make sure you click on Ontario if you're looking at Ontario species, and then you can filter down to like the specific growing conditions of your garden or backyard. And it talks about pretty much all native species in the area. So it's kind of fun to go and discover. And if you're looking for any native plants, that's the place to check it out. So now I'm going to go even more nerdy and talk about some of my favorite plants. One being the high bush cranberry. It's in the viburnum family, which is in the hydrangea family. And I always love to say this fact because people are shocked by it, but most cultivated hydrangeas, like the Annabelle, big flowers, look really, really pretty. I love them, but they actually don't have any true flowers on them. They're all modified bracts, so there's no nectar, there's no seed being produced, there's nothing for pollinators. It's basically a dead flower. It's just for show. So using our native species, because you can see that example, around the outside of the plant there, I don't know if I can. Anyways, around the outside of the plants, you see those are called modified bracts, look pretty similar to hydrangea flowers, right? Whereas those inside little bitty ones are the actual real flowers with the food for our pollinators. These guys attract them in, this one feeds them. So it's just interesting how our natives have diverged to our cultivated plants and how much they have changed. I always like to talk about willows. We only actually have one true willow tree in Ontario, and that's the black willow. We have quite a few different shrubs, like this example here, sandbar willow. Willows are also known in the plant community as like a keystone species. They support a very large variety of our native insects. So always like to plant those wherever possible since they hopefully support the most amount of insects. They also are really, really good for erosion. As you can see how dense they grow in there, and then they can grow into the water, creating that shade and that habitat for aquatic organisms as well. I'll keep going because I have a lot to talk about. Another one of my favorites being the button bush. It's a host plant for 15 specific bee species alone in Ontario. It's a great nectar source for many butterflies as well. And it's just got really cool flowers, like little balls. They're really awesome. And they're blooming right now. So if you're out in a wetland area, I highly suggest going to take a sniff on one of those because they smell really great. And they make great ornamental plants if you have wet enough soil. Also like to mention our swamp roses, as we do have native roses, and they're really beautiful. This one's more wet tolerant, but we do have some dry tolerant species as well that I find just as beautiful as our non-native ones. Again, a reason, like I said, bees, they only know a certain flower. They only know what that looks like. If you start having those really complicated, beautiful roses that have multiple petals, they really don't know what it could look like. Some bees could, some don't, so having like the OG flower, I guess I'll call it, really can bring in those pollinators. Another couple I like to mention is their early bloomers as well, the chokeberry a bit later, but the one being the fantastic serviceberry, becoming more commonly planted as they're very hardy species in our urban areas. They're very beautiful and provide great pollinator resources and edible fruit to both humans and birds. Fun fact about the name of serviceberries, it comes from the fact that once they start blooming, the soil's unfrozen enough to hold service. So you could have a funeral because you could eventually dig because this plant told them it was warm enough to actually dig now. The chokeberry I'd also like to mention, as it was a huge food source for Indigenous cultures across the country, and also really good for erosion control. Both these species we use very commonly as they provide the most benefits, aesthetic value, and landowners tend to really like them, and so do I. So maybe I'm a little biased in recommending them. And then some of the flowers. I know I've been talking a lot about flowers, but flowers can come from both herbaceous plants. I like these wildflowers, but also like the woody ones I just talked about. And like these group of photos show kind of the different seasons as well. You have your columbine. I like to bloom early spring. Again, I would classify that as almost ephemeral, just at the end of the ephemeral season, really great for hummingbirds and butterflies. As you can see in here, that's an individual flower, so the insect can go really deep in, get its food, and make sure it gets all that pollen off to be able to pollinate the next flower beside it. And then we have the asters, a very large family, also hosts a considerable number of insect species, mostly moths and butterflies, and they bloom in the fall. Whereas these other two are both summer bloomers. So it also shows that having different bloomers at different time feed our insects at different time, and also will live at different times. You won't probably see many columbine on the forest floor right now. You're gonna start seeing those black-eyed Susans are blooming right now, and so are purple cone flowers, but these guys come in later. So it shows the stages that a forest floor could take and how it benefits our insect populations, but also our birds. As once the asters are done blooming, they provide a lot of seeds later into winter, whereas coneflowers are earlier into the season as well. So we're currently working on a project in this area for shoreline naturalization. We have been specifically in the Cornwall area concerned for this is our 5th year here now. So we did a 3-year project where we have about the same amount of plants we put in the last 3 years. I actually think that was 10,000 from up to 2024. And now our new project, we're aiming to do another 8,000 in the area concern, restoring 4 kilometers of shoreline and 12,000 meters squared of riparian area. This is a photo of a site we did 3 years ago now. And I like to really emphasize that we totally get why you live on a shoreline. You're there for the view, you're there for the ability to go in the water. So we can work with the landowner to provide plants that work with your lifestyle. So for this example, his pathway was kind of down here. So we did shorter stuff here as his house is back here, and we got to taller stuff there. As I mentioned, root systems, what you see above is what's below. So you like those deeper root systems, but when you want to keep your viewpoint intact, you can have some shorter options available. That's why I had those plants listed out in short and tall, so you can truly plan out what kind of plants work best for you. So just another shameless plug about what we have to offer right now. We have one more planting season left, and then we're hitting those 8,000 plants. And then hopefully we'll be back working in the area again. I should mention that with our kits, you get a free site visit, so that's a chance to walk around the property with me, create that customized planting plan using our Natural Edge app, which is a kind of a landscaping restoration tool to help communicate with the landowners how your restoration plan will look in the future, and then you get those 50 native plant species. So 40 of those are going to be your woody species, your trees and your shrubs, and then 10 of your wildflowers. As I said, you want those deep roots for erosion control, and that's where those shrubs are going to be really beneficial. You can reach me at naturaledge@watersheds.ca. I'm always open to answering any random questions you have sometimes, so you can reach me whenever you need.
You mentioned that an invasive species of concern in this area is Phragmites. Mm-hmm. Like I know that there's been some funding and some programs and some working groups on tackling the Phragmites problem. Have you or has Watersheds or in the work that you do with that identified methods that are that have proven more effective than others? Obviously I've done a little bit of a hand pulling of Phragmites, and that doesn't seem very effective.
Yes.
So what are your thoughts on emerging techniques for controlling Phragmites?
Great question. We worked with the River Institute in a few different projects, removing Phragmites in a few different ways. Them doing the removal, us doing the planting afterwards. So we're kind of seeing how those projects are going right now. Some have worked better than others, whereas hand pulling kind of overgrown without continual pulling of that area, and hand pulling really only works in wet areas where the base can get drowned out as well. So we've tried in another area planting some tallest trees that I could get to hopefully outgrow those Phragmites in the future. And then we also worked and this is all in Lamoureux Park, I should say, another meadow area where we worked with the city of Cornwall, where they actually brought equipment in to like dig it out. So far, that's been very effective for removal-wise. Not as great for restoration, as the ground was really compacted, so all our trees are like this now. Some of them are shrubs and they can bounce back, but the trees, I'm a little worried they're gonna be very wonky trees in the future, but that was because the compacted soil just didn't allow them to be planted correctly. That's my guess. So we're currently working on a few things. My big hope and fear is the biocontrol method that has been released. So they've been releasing two-stemmed moths, they being University of Toronto, Ducks Unlimited Canada. There's a couple more different universities. University of Guelph is also working on this. So they've been releasing them across Ontario since 2019 after I just had a presentation on this the other day, so that's why I have the top of my head. But after researching for like 30-something years, I think it was, they started releasing those. So they've seen good results, but like that's the only way we can truly balance the page, or else we'll be digging it forever and ever until it's gone. So introducing that host plant, like I've been talking about this whole time, to control an invasive species with that host insect, I should say, that only eats Phragmites. So trying to balance the page. So we'll see how that goes. It's been effective in other things like purple loosestrife. It has been less effective in others by introducing a bigger problem in the end. But hopefully this was thoroughly researched, which it sounds like it was, and we have that good host connection, and that moth doesn't have other impacts in the future. So yeah.
Hi, Chantal.
Hi.
So I don't live on the water. However, I spend a lot of time on the water and in the water. I do also spend a lot of time outdoors. And according to your research, is there anything that you would be able to recommend, maybe not right now, that might be on your website in regards to the type of plant that I should be considering, or property owners should be considering, if you want to avoid attracting ticks? Because that's a big issue for me.
For sure. Get that question a lot.
Okay.
My answer is going to be somewhat scientific-based, somewhat personal, like observation-based, as this is a newly researched thing. Nothing's going to. So a tick is attracted to long grass. They can get to cool areas at the bottom. So even like shrubs that have like an understory, they can get to that deeper cold area in the sun and then come up when they want to feed, which is normally more morning and night, or spring and fall. We all noticed they were pretty bad this spring. I don't know if anyone else did, but I had a hard time with them this spring when it's cooler, whereas they like to hang out in that little understory. So they've done a study on a forest where it showed, this is an invasive species example, it was invaded with invasive barberry, which is a short little shrub, very dense foliage, creates that cool habitat where they're safe, and that predators couldn't get to them. So that study showed the bad side of invasive species, because that's not a typical forest understory we see. Same could probably be said with our gardens and our shorelines, or wherever else you interact. If you have that understory that supports those ticks, then you could potentially have more. Another study suggested just increasing the amount of birds to your areas. So birds are specific feeders, so some like insects, some like berries, some do a little bit of both. So if you can contract those little bit of both, then they could feed off those ticks as well. A lot of research has also suggested that leaving it naturalized, again, brings different predators in, like, no one likes to hear it, but mice and that sort of stuff, that helps reduce those ticks. So it's a balanced thing, but the research has definitely showed grass is not controlling them in any way. They can still get deep enough into the grass and the low area where those root systems are really tightly combined, like I said. They can get down in there and they're fine until it's cooler again. So I did read a study about comparing like a natural area. This was just in a rural, not near a shoreline, compared to the mode, and they had about the same either place. So it didn't have an impact on that mode to more natural states. So no plant's going to attract them. It's more about attracting those predators to eat them, to try to control that as well.
And do geese help with that?
Nope, not that I know of. Geese are one of the few birds that actually can eat grass, so they're not going after the harder to eat stuff because we've given them a good salad and they're going for it. So yeah. But definitely, I think we have a blog post about it, so maybe that can take you some of the links I've talked about if you go on our website.
So obviously in your programs, you source a lot of native shrubs and flowers.
Yep.
I was curious to know where you source them from in this area.
Yep.
And also, have you been involved with like advocating for better sourcing opportunities or like, you know, programs for native shrubs and flowers? Because they're still incredibly hard to source.
Yeah.
Like for just an individual consumer. Like locally, there are almost no options. Like I order my plants online and they get shipped, and like that's not, you know,
not a sustainable way of doing it.
It's not super sustainable,
No.
and I would love to support like a natural, a local provider.
Right.
So do you see more movement in that direction?
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely native. I'm having a hard time sourcing plants right now myself for their fall planting because that I think there's more uptake. So if you go to Canada Wildlife Federation website and look up like native plant, they have a great map on there that shows all native nurseries across the country. I think it might be countrywide. So that could be a way that you maybe find like a small one that you've never even heard about. The only one I know very locally to Cornwall is Harbors, but they're more focused on trees, not the wildflowers and kind of the more gardeny stuff. We source mainly from Ferguson's Forest Centre in Kemptville, Natural Themes in Frankfurt, which is near Belleville, Verbinens in Dundas, Pine Needle in Pontypool near Peterborough. But some of those are wholesalers, so they don't sell to the general public. So I totally understand your hardship with getting those native plants, but check out that website as there might be someone you don't even know about, because I'm starting to go to those little guys as well, and they're popping up all over the place. So, and in terms of your questions about the seeds needed, we did do some consulting with Carolinian Canada, I believe it's called. They did a whole seed study that's very much more southern than us, but they did a whole seed and native plant research about their availability and how to move forward with using those. So I'd encourage reading that, so maybe it's applicable to our areas as well. But I do see an uptake in native plants for sure.
Sarah Hay online, wasn't a question, but also just add on to the where to find seeds, mentioned that you can usually go to various local like garden clubs who will often give out seeds. So she mentioned like in Williamstown, there's one Green Thumbs that hands out seeds if people want some.
Also should mention with seeds, check your Facebook. There are tons of groups giving out native seeds, sharing native plants. I'm part of like the Ottawa Wildflower Library. They mail me seeds every year and I put them in my garden. Like there's lots of resources. Chat with your neighbor. Again, supply and demand. If you start supplying it, the demand will go up, and if neighbors can see you making those changes, that's how we change mentalities. And I hope I showed you that it's important to maybe transition to some more native plants and then supporting our ecosystem both on the water, in town, rural, wherever you live, you can support it. Even if you just have an apartment and you put some black-eyed Susans in a pot or something. Like we always are saying is every action counts, and it's so true, especially when it comes to pollinators and supporting ecosystems.
Thanks for a great talk, Chantal. I always learn something new, and from a fish nerd to a plant nerd, I appreciate your enthusiasm. Some of my neighbors where I live have been starting to plant clover instead of grass, and there's kind of, see like this movement maybe a little bit towards that. Do you have any thoughts on that, or just advice to people where they don't know what to do with grass, but maybe they don't want shrubs everywhere, but they want something that's kind of low, something
that kind
like
of that no mow May mentality.
Yeah.
We'll start with clover is not a native species. I haven't heard anything negative about it. It's not invasive. Like it's not going to invade our forest, or only going to be those disturbed sites generally. So that's a big distinction between not native and invasive. Invasive meaning it's having negative impact, whereas non-native it's just been naturalized or just not from here. So we'll say that about clover. I use it in my own garden as it's very tolerant to droughts and dog pee. With our drier climate or less storms, having a more drought tolerant lawn is good because you don't have to water them. So there's that benefit. They're pretty good for pollinators. I don't have a stat like they have 50% less pollen or something like that, so I haven't heard anything too negative about it. So I think it's a good direction to go because we still like our lawns and our activity areas, but if we can leave it just a little bit more natural, they could have a lot more benefits than just our Kentucky bluegrass turf we have around here. So not around here, but just in general. And other good native plant options I'll add in, if you do want native, is wild strawberry. Yarrow doesn't mind getting mowed a lot and will still bloom.
Creeping Charlie.
That's Creepy Charlie's not a native one, but also not invasive. So again, one of those. Way though. Yes, it does. Yeah, they're really nectar-filled flowers.
You see, if you go to stores, I've never checked to see if they are native. You see, if you go to stores, pretty much everywhere, even like Farm Boy has them, are like plants for like repelling mosquitoes. Are there like native options for those, or are those usually from somewhere else?
That's a good question. Spice bush is really great for repelling mosquitoes. It's a native shrub. Pretty much anything stinky, I feel like, might be effective. So that's why you have the citronella and all those. So I'm thinking, this is off the top of my head, not anything proven, but like spice bush I know for sure. That was actually like rubbed on people because it's a really spicy smelling when you break up the leaf. That was used as a mosquito repellent, but you have to break the leaf to get the scent out. So I'm not sure how good it would be like just to plant it. Wild bergamot, also known as bee balm, has pretty scented leaves. That one might be effective. It's a good question. I'm gonna have to look into some other options, but yeah, I think anything stinky would repel them. Yeah, anything that can block their CO2 sensors from scenting you. So that's kind of how DEET works, right? Like they block that sensor. So if you have something stinky sitting beside you, it blocks that sensor for the CO2.
So I was curious in your work with property owners, and you do these consultations, and of course you're invited in, right? So the landowner's already interested, or their interest is piqued by what you do. So maybe they're selecting themselves for being open to your ideas. But what do you find is like the biggest stumbling block for landowners, or the big misconceptions that they might have? Like when you go there, are your ideas generally well received, or are they like, well, you got to be kidding me, I'm not going to do that?
Right.
Or I had no idea that what I was doing anything, negative
That happens
to the environment.
a lot. We have a lot of generational changes in our cottages. So I'm going to talk mostly cottage properties here with our Natural Edge, sometime residential as well, like permanent homes, but anything lakeside or riverside, I should say. I keep forgetting on the St. Lawrence River here, but there's definitely a lot of blockage. Mostly is they're worried they can't use their property anymore because of ticks, mosquitoes, or just not wanting to touch plants. Sometimes you get those kind of people. But we really pride ourselves in customizing it. So we're kind of between a renaturalization and landscaping, I kind of like to say, as we can work with the landowner to make whatever restoration plan applicable to them. So sometimes that's just shorter shrubs that may not have that many erosion control benefits, but it'll have many benefits to the pollinators, that sort of stuff. So, and maybe it's so flat and it doesn't need taller stuff. So I work with them to recommend what's best and then what's actually gonna work for them. Because like I said, anything better is nothing, every action counts. So I always like to ask, what do you love here? Why are you here? Are you here for the birds? Are you here for the fish? You're here just to look at the lake. Like what's most important, and then you can plan it accordingly. That even works from like the back end maintenance wise of your property. Like I'm always there because there's been a disturbance, but even in managing or developing a property, you can think of it that way as well. How you use the property and how you can restore it or keep it in a good state. So if you like to fish, shade's really important. Like if you don't want understory because you're scared of ticks or poison ivy or something, then just put some trees and mow around it. Like that still has benefits. So that's what we try to persuade, is get them on board. But yeah, we do go to a lot of people who already want us there. Some are just trying to learn. Like they just bought a cottage, or their grandpa gave them the cottage and they don't know what to do with it. They've been living in Toronto or they don't want to mow their lawn anymore because they're from far away. So there's always a reason. And then they talk to their neighbors. I've been like, oh, so-and-so mentioned you, and now I'm here a couple weeks later, a couple years later doing it. So that's why I really employ people to talk to people, share some knowledge maybe you gain today or gain in the future. And and try to change some mindsets as the science is really showing we need to make some changes.
Hi, Chantal. Hi. We started our naturalization project in the spring in Morrisburg.
Yes, it's good to see you.
It's going really well.
Yeah, it's
We
good.
love it. One of the challenges we had with our property was we had acres of turf grass that wasn't really providing any value to anybody, except the people we paid to take care of it. But we've been slowly planting native species in our riparian area and trying to expand that. But we're learning that it's very difficult to get rid of grass. So we've been mostly planting in it and around it and taking measures to kind of smother it out as wherever we can. In terms of any native plants or trees, is there any detrimental effect to those growing in or around grass, either short-term or long-term, or do you find better success removing all of the grass before you start your planting projects?
Right. There's a few different ways you can start a planting project. With our program, we go just naturalization, let it be. That can have some competition with that grass. Grass requires a lot of water for most species, especially those turf grasses. So it could be taking resources away from the young tree. If it gets taller than the plant you've planted, that would take away the sunlight. I'm also a fan of not killing everything, though, unless you're creating like a really established manicured native plant garden. There's an interesting book called Finding the Mother Tree. This is more applicable to forest, but it really talks about how they're leaving understory. It mostly focuses on mushrooms, but it also just talks about moisture level, organic material in your soil. Other things like that can really help your newly planted species because they've taken from a nursery where they've been babied and fertilized and watered every day until the wild. It's like releasing a child and saying, figure it out. So if you plant within like some other stuff, they can have benefits, but have negatives. So again, it's finding the balance. That's why we on your property use those hemp mats to keep the grasses immediately beside it. But that really only helps with the keeping moisture and less competition, but could have different benefits farther away. We have a pollinator garden guide. That one has many different options in how to start a project, but it really depends on the scale of your project and what you want it to look like in the end as well. So you could do total killing of the grass through solarization with like a black tarp, herbicides, or just digging it up. So that's really intensive kind of stuff. Or you can kind of pull and keep the competition back till it eventually grows in. With wildflower garden guides, competition's a lot worse than shrubby because they're not going vertical, they want to go that way. So then you have more competition with wildflowers, then they can't spread, but at vertical, the grass isn't going to compete against them. It's more the taller trees that are around it. So it depends per site and how much work you want to put in it too as well. So we've had some properties who really liked a manicure look. I think I eventually did take the photo of this presentation, but they loved a manicure look, loved his pristine green lawn with the cuts, but really understood that being on a river, the water came up every year and was destroying his property. So he made the decision to stop mowing right to the edge. I think we did like a 3 or 4 meter wide buffer, and then he edged the whole thing and then put mulched it for multiple years until it filled in, and did like a rock line as well. So it's a really stark difference between the manicured, overly manicured grass and then the natural area. So that was their perspective on it as well, and he put a lot of effort into having it nothing growing other than what we planted. So it's really up to you, and some of our projects are acres big, so there's no maintenance long term, but so it's really up to the landowner and how they want to approach it.
Well, thank you so much, Chantal. Really
No
appreciate
problem.
you coming. Thanks everyone for joining. We're going to be hosting these again the last Thursday of every month here at Schnitzel's and on Facebook Live. So you're welcome to join us anytime. Kat Kavanagh will be our next speaker presenting from Water Rangers.
She's great.
Yeah, she's wonderful.
Yes. We also use her kits the Water Rangers kits to sample all the places we go to and supply data to both the lake associations and the landowner and water rangers. So, yeah.
Perfect. We got you a little something to say. Thank
thanks.
you. So let's just thank you. Thank you so much.
Is it merch? I've wanted merch. Yes.
Thanksgiving address book.
Oh, awesome. Thank you.
So much for coming.
Great, thanks for coming.